Hi, I'm James Bonk, and I have a few things to say about techno-capitalism, freedom, and community. Let's talk about Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget. So in this film, if you're familiar with the first one, you'll remember that all of the chickens escaped from a really horrific, oppressive chicken farm, and they went and built a commune out in the woods. In Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget, the oppressor has evolved, and it reminds me a lot of what we've seen in, I guess, the history of colonization and wars. I don't know. I actually do know, I just wasn't able to articulate it at the time, so I'm coming to you from the editing room. I made some notes. Now, I've been spending a little bit of time on the Australian Strategic Policy website, which, let me tell you, has absolutely ruined my recommended ads. They have this idea that in liberal democracies, the Western world, we moved away from kinetic warfare after World War II. Kinetic warfare is like dropping bombs, shooting people, marching into a village. We're not doing that anymore, it's not cool. That's what happened in Chicken Run 1, which was set during World War II. Chicken Run 2 is set during the Cold War, when it was much more cool to be doing propaganda and soft power activities and really proving that your dick is bigger than other countries' dicks, which is where we get the space race, the nuclear arms race, this kind of thing. It's also, I'm sort of doing some research into its effect on STEM education, because that sort of thinking has not completely died. But what's important for us to know in this occasion is that since the Cold War, we've kind of evolved even further past that, and we see little hints of this beginning in Chicken Run with the mind control collars. There's something called hybrid warfare in the cognitive domain, which is to Western liberal democracies, it's the boogeyman countries like Russia and China doing maybe covert surveillance over social media, but more importantly, putting out content that might reduce people's faith in their country or in their democracy, inciting unrest, maybe using tools like swarm bots, fake accounts, disinformation. I don't know if you remember a while ago on Meta, Facebook and Instagram, they would flag certain content and certain accounts as Russian state-controlled media. Sometimes it wasn't, sometimes it was, and it's absolutely no doubt, there's been an inquiry into it that absolutely was Russian state-controlled media on online, but there's a lot of other stuff going on as well that we don't know about, and I'll show you one thing. Content and ideas plus cyber, the sleeper in our national security defenses. This is from 2018. So this is actually not new. This is not even post the Cambridge Analytica scandal. People have been aware of it for quite a while. But the idea is there's always a low level of aggressive activities between countries that are not war. They're below the line. That's the hybrid warfare. And it's happening in the cognitive domain because everybody is battling for your attention. There's that old saying by Trotsky, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. It means that even when a war is not happening, Russia and China are trying to put ideas in your head. And your liberal democracy government, like Australia or America, is trying to defend you against those ideas. And they could both be using content that just looks like normal TikTok influencers or, Facebook groups. So that's a little bit terrifying. I hope you enjoy it. If you go back to old Roman times, you might be familiar with the phrase bread and circuses, which is a metaphor for how the ruling class of that society would provide battles at the Colosseum, or there would be plays, or there would be enrichment in your enclosure. You'd have enough food and you'd have something to do on the weekend, and that means the people will not revolt, no matter how much you're exploiting them. Think about the way we live today. If you have a little bit of privilege, if you have the security of a full-time job, it's easy to be sort of lulled into this complacency. Having your own little bread and circuses moment will really keep you from engaging with problems of the wider world, particularly if you're still feeling traumatized by them. The chickens need to deal with intergenerational trauma, and they also need to deal with their personal trauma. So, spoiler alert, Ginger's daughter, Molly, finds herself in a chicken farm, and Ginger and the chicken squad have to go and break her out. So they have to face up to their own very specific trauma, and they have to actually go through it again out of their love and solidarity for a member of their community. And then once they're in there, they have to care beyond the family. Let's have a look at this. I long for models of solidarity and human unity and difference, rooted in friendship, work, partially shared purposes, intractable collective pain, inescapable mortality, and persistent hope. This is a quote from Donna Haraway in Abolish the Family, which is a really interesting book that does talk a lot about what the institution of the family does and how it helps support a capitalist power paradigm and support the idea of a state. We talked a little bit before about hybrid warfare between countries, but when you sort of break down the idea of a family and what that does for identity and finance, the idea of a country really starts to fall apart as well. In fact, in Network, that beautiful movie I mentioned earlier, they say there are no peoples, there are no countries. There's only money. That's the real power that controls everything. And, you know, one day in the future, every boredom will be entertained and every need will be provided for and everyone will shut up and stay where they are. And, you know, the people on top will be rich and that will be like world peace. That will be the end. Please give it a read. That's a unifying force for all chickens in Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget. Because even though the main group of chickens we're familiar with have created a small pocket of safety in the world and they have the privilege to be able to relax because they're not directly being oppressed, they become aware that other chickens are being farmed in cruel ways and on a bigger scale than ever before. And although initially they're reluctant to do something about it because they're traumatized and they want to cling to their safety, they eventually understand that they have to act. They have this privilege of being able to help other chickens become free. And they have to use it because their freedom is tied to the freedom of all other chickens. They are always going to be at the mercy of a world that wants to eat chickens, and they talk about this in the film. They continue to work together and they continue to work around each other's idiosyncrasies, which is, I think, is a really strong form of love. You'll notice that everybody in the chicken community is supported and cared for and included, and the leadership will go out of their way to make sure members of the community who aren't so useful or onto it are still included in everything and are still made to feel valued because they are valuable parts of the community. The enemy in this film is just trying to make money and kill chickens. You're familiar with Mrs. Tweedy from the first film, and to be honest, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what she wants, but I would say it's financial freedom. Mrs. Tweedy, I think it's actually more than financial freedom. I think it's more looking to win and have control and have power, which, you know, they're not completely separate. But it really reminded me of something that I learned in my management degree, of all things. We were talking about workplace diversity, and my lecturer told us, yeah, there's been a lot of push to get women in the C-suite, so CEO, COO, that kind of thing. But the problem is that a lot of the time, because of what they have to go through to get there, they are really just female-presenting men by the time they get there. This is not an uncommon idea, but I was like 18, it was the first time I'd heard it, and I was like, whoa. So, to give bit of an idea. In order to win at capitalism, you need to really desire power through money above anything else. Mrs. Tweedy does this very well. So she has some really, really useful traits as a capitalist. She's not afraid to forge relationships for her own personal gain, which we call networking. You'll notice that she strategically chooses a husband who can help her build her chicken farm. And then in the movie, she's lining up her next husband who's going to help her distribute her products from the chicken farm. And there's never an indication that she really likes either of them. It's always like they are being used. And they might even know that, but they're letting it happen. Mrs. Tweedy is kind of a girl boss. She is willing to use her femininity as a marketing tool or as something that might gain her a little edge over someone else, but she really adheres to capitalist principles or like masculine, colonial, old type principles above all else. She wants to extract, dominate, control, proliferate, and she is willing to give up anything and everything she values to that end. She has, with the help of her current husband, engineered a techno-capitalist dystopia for chickens. There's mind control, there's light entertainment, and a lot of sort of theatre and lies to keep the chickens complacent, to keep them happy so that they're more easily exploited, so that they're more tasty when they're dead, so they're more profitable. And it reminds me a lot of how we are with the visions we see every day on our phones and the way that we are able to be manipulated by big data and people who own big technology platforms and people who exploit big technology platforms. Oppression comes from entertainment and sedation. Have you seen the movie Network?
We sit in the house and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone.
Let me have my small comforts so that I don't have to face up to a broader responsibility that I have to the rest of the world, so that I don't have to be brave and defend myself and my kith and kin, my broader community. The chickens are joyous on the chicken farm. They're happy and they're kind of out of it. They're denying reality, but they're fine with it because they have enough corn to eat and they have like funny little songs and flashing lights and rides and things. And I really do believe that this distraction and entertainment is a huge force to be weaponized when you want to perhaps stop certain people from taking action. Strong communities can metabolize the weapons of their oppressors and rebirth them as useful tools. Nothing they've gone through is really wasted because they've actually taken sometimes physical tools, like there are weaponized laser ducks that they're using to heat up popcorn, and there are those electric mind control collars which they're just using recreationally for fun, but also the tactics that they developed to escape or to deal with their situation continue to be useful tactics for just optimizing their way of life in freedom. So the things that they've learned and the things that they've created together are not used for violence, they're used for good. And the things that they took from their oppressors, they are able to repurpose for their own benefit, which is, I think, a beautiful way of explaining how we can grow from things or how we can compost things for our own benefit, for our own collective thriving. The first step on the road to dystopia is our relationships with our immediate neighbours. I think this was really well illustrated in a certain referendum that we had in Australia. Oh, the referendum. So I know this is a really difficult subject because there was so much going on. But a lot of what was going on was deliberately confusing. There was a lot of misinformation and disinformation. I would really recommend having a listen to The Others, which is a podcast normally organised by Tyson Yonkaporta. They have 2 episodes that are useful. There's a disinformation webinar, and there's an episode called Fascist Tears, which both mention the disinformation. Well, they really go into the disinformation that happened around the referendum. There's this beautiful thing going on right now. Australians for a Murdoch Royal Commission. In Australia, News Corp, which is one of the Rupert Murdoch media monopoly organisations, really needs to be investigated because 70% of the information they put out during the lead up to the Voice referendum was in favour of a no vote, which probably doesn't surprise any of us. But weirdly enough, the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is one of the people leading the charge to make sure that there's a royal commission, because they claim that fear, manipulation and division were used to ensure that the no vote won, which feels pretty realistic, feels pretty accurate to me. And I do know that the Murdoch media were funding several different looking no campaigns that seemed to be coming from different sources, but they were all actually the same and just had different tactics of targeting different people. So that's problematic, to say the least. The division between all of us and the things that stop us from talking to each other, stop us from working together, that is the biggest help for someone who's trying to exploit us. And we see this in the techno-dystopia chicken farm in this movie, where everyone is kind of oblivious of each other. Sometimes they'll just like bump right into each other and not even notice. They're not really looking each other in the eye and having a conversation. They have no communication between each other. They're all just like coexisting in their own weirdly sedated lives. And Molly, Ginger's daughter, enters this farm and says, "Oh, I can just kind of play all day here. I used to make jam with this person and I used to pick vegetables with this person." She was connected through work, shared purpose, shared understanding, and like common needs and goals to a whole bunch of different people who would have been peers, elders. She's referring to some rats she knows as uncle, even though they're a completely different species. She has this great idea of camaraderie and a really beautiful expanded notion of community. And that's the first thing she loses when she enters this techno-dystopia where everyone is entertained and everybody is oblivious and mildly content. I just want to finish by saying that this is a tale of hope. And it's a really clear illustration of what holds us back, what keeps us from each other, and what keeps us under an oppressor's thumb. It's a really clear illustration of the dangers of capitalism paired with advanced technology and how that can control huge masses of people without obvious violence, but with a much more insidious form of control. It's a little bit like 1984, but imagine if instead of the enemy being a fascist government, it was just a couple of people with a lot of technology at their disposal. I hope you watch this film and it gives you something to think about. I hope you tell me what you think about it in those little comments. And I'll see you next time on Snot Club.